The Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Hello, and welcome back to the show. As a reminder, Tuesdays we do our deep dive into a topic. Wednesdays we have our 10-minute empathy expansion kit series. And today, Thursdays, we dive into a topic with our guests. Today, we are talking about critical habits of high performance. I'm Stephen Sakach, here once again with Mike Liwski from our team. Mike, introduce our guests for today's show.
Yes, thank you, Stephen. And I do welcome back everyone to the Bliss Business Podcast. So today we have a truly inspiring guest, Mr. Mark Cunningham. For our followers who might not know Mark, he's the founder and CEO of the Achieve Institute. He's the visionary behind the Achieve system, a customizable and scalable performance and productivity system that has been instrumental in transforming some of the largest and well-known corporations in the U.S. So you might be curious, Mark's journey is nothing short of remarkable. With over 25 years in performance consulting, he's transitioned from being an elite athlete to a business coach and entrepreneur. Mark, in fact, was training to compete in the Olympics in the decathlon when an injury led him to rethink his approach to maximum performance. This pivotal moment inspired him to develop the Achieve system, a comprehensive set of productivity tools designed to help organizations innovate, define and drive strategy, lead through change, and then strengthen employee engagement. Before the age of 30, Mark was already coaching senior executives to help them enhance their performance. He founded the Achieve Institute to share those insights and the tools with a broader audience, helping teams and organizations achieve their highest potential for over the last 20 years. Mark's the perfect guest for this episode as his unique blend of athletic discipline and business acumen offer the invaluable insights into achieving peak performance and fostering a supportive, high-performing workplace, which I know many of you are very interested in. So to get us ready, in this episode, we'll explore Mark's unique approach to performance improvement, the critical habits that high performers have to have, and how organizations can balance high performance with empathy and human connection, because that's really what we're about. We'll also delve into practical steps for creating supportive workplace environments without compromising on productivity. So let's get right into it, Stephen, and welcome the extraordinary Mark Cunningham to the podcast.
Hey, Mark, can you start? Mike covered this a little bit, but tell us what led you to create the Achieve Institute.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it really was by accident. It was through major frustration as we were sharing there. I was training at the elite level, and I was getting frustrated because I was good one day and not the next, and I couldn't get this consistency that I was looking for. And then you get more and more frustrated because you like, wait, I know I can do this, but it's not happening at the level I think it should be. And ultimately, the Achieve Institute and the Achieve system came from my biggest failure, which was trying to make the Olympics, and I ended up getting hurt and everything that comes with that. So it was really from really getting underneath what were the things I did right, but more importantly, what were the things I was not doing right that would have yielded a better outcome, and what are those little secrets to high performance? So the Achieve Institute, ironically, and the Achieve system came from a failure and disappointment. And I wanted to get underneath why it happened, and just for my own sanity and my own sense of, wait, I want to understand what's going on here. And ironically, when I was learning from it, I talked to other people, and what I went through was very similar to other people. So it was pretty universal.
That's really interesting. So Mark, I'm really curious, are there some critical habits that you've identified within top performers? Are there habits that might even surprise some of our listeners of top performers?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a few things where when I look at high performance, one of the things I recognize that one is you have to make a commitment to it. It doesn't happen automatically. And a lot of times, without knowing it, like when I was doing what I was doing, you're all in. There isn't like a part-time, half-time thing. It's not a dabbling endeavor. But interestingly, when I started working with big organizations, I assumed that was the case when actually it's not. A lot of big organizations fall into what we, survival mode and trying to survive quarter to quarter. And we got to hit that next number or else. And what I recognized, one of the things that was missing was that commitment to high performance. And we were coaching and helping people, and they'd get a little better and they'd say, oh, I'm doing great. I'm like, well, you're doing better than you were. You're just not in trouble anymore. And they kind of stopped taking their vitamins and stopped doing the right things. And I realized that, one, you need to get this commitment to high performance. It's a key component. And that helps align, are we doing the right things every day?
Interesting.
Yeah, it was really interesting. And then you start talking to me about survival versus high performance, and they realize, yeah, we're just trying to get quarter to quarter, month to month, because the real world works. It just keeps rolling over, and you have to actually personally recommit, if you will, and that actually gets alignment with people. Whenever we do this with people, unanimous, people want to be on a high performing team. Unanimous, people want to be part of a winning organization. So it isn't a hard ask to ask for people to say, hey, are you committed to being a high performing team or high performing in your role? Because everyone wants to, but oftentimes that's the missing first piece, is that commitment and getting that piece of that.
Excellent. So beyond that critical component being there, are there a few others that you look for?
Yeah, it's funny. So it starts with that level, like getting that commitment. But as you said, there are these habits that are practices that what people do. Because when we ask people what is high performance, it goes very broad. Okay. And there's like 70, 80 answers, and they're all right. The problem is it's so broad and vague. Then people go back to tactics, like, what are you doing every day? And they're not looking at performance. And what we look at are there's two big things that drive performance in all people, teams, and organizations, whether they know it or not. And one is attitude and mindset. Mm-hmm. And we all know that's how people feel every day. That's why engagement matters. That's why empathy matters. That's why creating strong cultures matter. So we use the analogy of, like, that's the car you drive. And that's culture, environment, attitude, and mindset. The other one is what we call your approach. And that's how you do things every day. And what we see, that approach, often people are leaving results on the table every day on how they approach their work. And these are the habits that we help foster when we work with people. And one of them, without knowing it, is wherever we go, Mike, people are running around doing things, but actually without knowing it, they're more oriented backwards instead of forwards.
So Mark, now that's really interesting, because our workplace has changed radically. So I'm actually curious about these habits. Have the habits evolved as the workplace has changed?
That's a great question. It's actually the other way around. This is actually the way people have been working for a long time without knowing it. The speed of change is happening so much faster, so it's much more disruptive. Used to be in a job, and things kind of stayed the same year to year, year to year, even decade to decade. And now that change is happening so much more rapidly. And what that means is what I did yesterday is not as relevant as it was 5-10 years ago. So that creates a kind of pressure. And what we look at in everything we do is, how do people respond to things? And when people don't have a strong future, we use something, they actually get anxious, they get uncomfortable, they move into what we call the left column, which is like feeling frustrated, overwhelmed. We have the right column is when you're on and in the zone and really working well. Well, all this change is disrupting people, and what's happening is their rearview mirror is less relevant, and now they really don't have a strong future. One of the things we do with people to get them to be more grounded and more actually effective is make sure they have a strong future. And oftentimes that's missing. And that's missing at an organizational level as well. So that is one of those key habits that we talk about, is make sure you're forward oriented instead of backward oriented. but know that the default setting, if we're not careful, is backwards. What I mean by that is I expect more of the same, so then I do more of the same, because that, and then it becomes a cycle, and we're missing, like, hey, there's a whole bunch of other possibilities out there. So we're really stuck in that, what we call the rear view mirror, instead of looking forward. And getting people to be forward oriented, you unleash a whole nother level of productivity and performance.
So how do we?
Thanks for highlighting that, and that's something really to be mindful of.
Yeah. So how do we do that? We're setting, obviously they have KPIs and things like that, but is it like more of just like a North Star for a group? What's the mechanism?
Great. And there's OKRs are great and KPIs are great. The problem with that is I could say, okay, how am I getting there based on what I've done? And then I feel like restricted by that. This is a little more North Star, but what people have to start getting is what people over-index on is the plan. And the plan is, here's what we're going to do to get from here to there. And they have comfort in their plan. And the problem with that is when the plan goes wrong, which it will, all of a sudden you're like, oh no, this means we're not going to get there, because they're focused more on the plan than the outcome. And that's one of the second big habits that we teach people, is something we call create, don't fix. Wherever we go, we actually see organizations are fixing, but like 70 to 90% of the time. We need to fix this problem. We need to fix that problem. And it's a very suboptimal way of tackling things, because when we're fixing, we're actually oriented backwards instead of forwards. What we talk about is create what you need, don't fix what you have. Because oftentimes fixing what you have still won't get you the results you need. When you're in create mode, you're forward oriented instead of backwards oriented. And this works at scale. So this works with entire departments. It works with entire industries. Like literally an entire company has an approach, and we're helping them to reshape that so it's more effective. By the way, every time you make that adjustment, you take people from the left column to the right column. So now you got energized, motivated, engaged people. Why? You've actually improved the way they're approaching their work every day. And those little changes make a big difference. And I always joke with people, I did all of these the wrong way first. I literally did it the wrong way when I was training. And that's kind of why I got frustrated and stuck. And there's one year I was fixing my discus, and I was one of the better discus throwers in the country. And it just got worse and worse and worse as I fixed it. Without knowing it, I said, wait, I got to do something different or get a different job. And I said, wait, what's in a good discus throw instead of fixing mine? Mm-hmm. And in 6 weeks, I gained 30 feet, and I was one of the top throwers in the world that year. And I worked on it half as much, but that was the little adjustment I made in my approach. So I went from totally frustrated to now I'm like totally excited about my performance there. So these little things can make a big difference.
I wonder too, when you're talking about that, how athletes, sometimes you break that barrier, that just happens. Like someone just did something, and now everyone, comes after that and starts breaking that barrier much sooner, faster, further. I wonder if that's just because of that forward thinking mentality. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's a couple of those things that are happening on the mindset side. Oh, you can't do that. When someone else does it, you go, oh, we can do that. So there's a part of your what we call your operating framework, which is that mindset culture, your belief structure. If I believe something's not possible, the way I go prove it is by not doing it. If someone starts doing it, all of a sudden it's possible. So, I'm going to do it because someone else did it. Now it takes someone to make that breakthrough happen, but that shifts the psyche of everyone, because you go, wait, we can do this. So then more people do it faster and faster, like the 4-minute mile and things like that. But that's the other. But the other part is that forward thinking. Like the person who drives the breakthrough, they were connected to that possibility. But those other people, hey, now we know it can be done. So they may be stuck in the rearview mirror still. And so it's a very interesting dynamic. But what's interesting is these are habits and practices that people are doing every day, whether they know it or not. And that's what's neat about this, is it's actually these subtle little adjustments that you go and do. It's not just an idea. You actually go work on these things. And that's what's neat about it, because they are habits.
So Mark, I actually have kind of a question for you. You know, the topic of artificial intelligence is, you know, talked about every single day. And in your thought around, you know, what is in a really good discus throw, you had to have access to information to that, right? To make what was that. So I'm kind of curious, with artificial intelligence today, what's your thought on its ability to either help us or hinder us to have, you know, organizations and people and teams achieve more?
It's a really great question, and we get it all the time. And we're working with our customers on this because, you know, it's the thing of the moment of AI, and what we remind people is there's going to be people that do it well, and there's going to be people that don't do it well. And what we overlay is, okay, how are you using this tool? And that's very important because a lot of people, what we see, just in what I shared earlier, people are using it to fix a whole bunch of things, but it's not directionally towards something. And it's going to be suboptimal. It's going to be less effective than the people that say, okay, how do we really deploy this? But towards that optimal state of when we're working well. And one of the things that we do that's a little different isn't like optimal, like perfect, but more just in reality when it's working well, what's happening. Because things are dynamic, so that's changing. But the people that start using AI to say, wait, what does good look like when we're utilizing this tool? Use the create, don't fix. They will gradually feed that picture. You don't need the whole painting to start. You need to just know, wait, directionally, where am I going? And then you fill in those pieces of here's what it looks like when we're optimizing AI, and it's going to be changing. So what that means now is different 3 years from now, 5 years from now. What people do is they get stuck doing the same thing. Remember, being stuck in that rearview mirror, if you will.
Right.
And they're trying to improve on the way they've been doing it versus evolving into the new way. And there's a interesting, I say it all the time, is like when you make a copy of a copy of a copy, it gets a little worse, a little worse, a little worse. When you recreate, it gets better and better and better. So that's one of those things like, hey, when we're using AI right, what does that look like is different than we got to go fix these problems. Let's throw AI at this.
That makes a ton of sense. Yeah, it seems like a really key principle that has to be woven through, you know, all the way through. So thanks for highlighting that.
Yeah, and on that, Mike, we see actually, because 20 years experience, we've been able to go out and act, like witness. We actually see people have that strong direction less than 10% of the time. They over-index on plans.
That makes a ton of sense. That's
I'm thinking if you're forward thinking like that, that should be freeing for a lot of people, and and people think differently is what I'm thinking about. You have this diversity of thought, this diversity of approach, and now you're just saying, hey, this is the North Star. What if we did this, this, or this, which is just, you know, more out of the box thinking, right? Is that correct in that assumption?
You're absolutely right. And what we've learned is when you don't have alignment on where you're going, you have real big battles on how do we get there? What's the way? So people not fight over the way. I think we should do it this way. I think we should do it that way. Have differing opinions, diverse approaches, right? When we actually, what we get people to get is agree on where you're going and then have debates on how to get there. Because there's a lot of ways to get there, and then you leverage that diversity as a strength versus it being this thing where people just keep colliding. And then that actually negatively impacts your culture because groups are fighting over the way, and then one way doesn't get their way, and then they're unhappy because it's about the way instead of the outcome. And those little adjustments really make a big difference also on just people's well-being, because we see people that are stuck at work because they're just fighting the way. And that little shift, all of a sudden they're energized and motivated. And then those debates and where things aren't working and where we disagree become just those are little bumps we've got to work through. We're all still going to the same place.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of key, is that sort of connection goal, that human connection. We talk about that a lot. How do you solve those problems of like high performance at all cost. And, this is where I guess, a sociopath could just run through everybody in whatever the system set up, right? So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so we always stand on what we call it a point B, as you see behind me. And point B is like, where are you going? And North Star, point B, it's simplify things. But what we start with is, when we're winning, and the key word there is we're, right? We are winning. We are winning. When we are winning, what does that look like? Is that when I'm winning? Because our goal, a high-performing organization, you get the most out of your entire organization, not just a few people in your organization. And that's that's when you start to really leverage the full capacity of your workforce. When people aren't engaged, you are leaving performance on the table. You may be hitting a few KPIs and a few targets along the way, but you are not getting the most out of your workforce, which means you are not you're not firing on all cylinders. You're not delivering what you could be delivering. There's more that you could deliver.
Yeah, I want to underline almost the importance of that, because you talked about the we aspect. And I think that's where a lot of companies kind of get into trouble, because you're just so focused on, the KPI or the shareholder value or something. And this is how they end up going sideways with their systems, is because this is the only focus. It's not thinking about what's the we. So the we is the employees, the customers, and the shareholders, right? That's kind of the approach there. It's more empathetic, right?
Yeah, and not only that, it's sustainable versus not sustainable. Because in the long run, you need a winning organization. It has to sustain. And you may hit a few results, but if you are, really crushing your people along the way, you won't be able to sustain that. So actually, you're going to pay for that later. So one of the things that we've gotten underneath is actually high performance includes engaged people that are getting the most out of your workforce. It's not against each other. They're totally aligned. And what you'll see is that win at all cost is you're leaving results. You actually you can get to a number, but the wrong way. And remember, I said it's not one outcome here; it's an ongoing thing. Well, you got to do that and better 6 months from now or a year from now, because that's the expectation. When you're doing it that way, it starts to fall apart. When you do it the right way, it gets stronger and stronger naturally. We focus on what we call capacity. What's your capacity circle? Like, what can you deliver? And when you do things the right way, you create this growing capacity across your organization. When you do it the wrong way, you may squeeze the capacity out of the organization, but then it starts to shrink. And those subtle things make a difference on that trajectory, because high performance isn't doing something once, it's doing it over and over again.
Yeah, it's systemizing it, right? So
that's right.
And it's making it a viable system. Talk a little bit more though about that squeezing in that capacity a little bit. I mean, some of the details in there.
Yeah. So one of the things we do is there's a thing we have that we call best actual, which is what's the best you can do right here, right now. And a lot of people, what they tend to focus on is what we did yesterday or last week or what's ideal, and not wait, what can we do right now? And that's me taking my capacity today and optimizing it. And I learned the hard way on this one too, because I was always doing what I call best relative, which is, okay, I got to beat my best score. I got to beat my best throw every time. And the truth is that's not the way it works. And I was around some world-class, world-leading people. They didn't work that way. They worked in a way where every day they won the day. But they knew their capacity and they played at that, what we call the edge of your capacity. When you use your capacity, you grow. When you don't, it shrinks. What problem is, if you're way outside, you do way less. You don't do more. And it's just finding that edge of capacity, which is, hey, what's the best we can do on this right here, right now? And that's that one of those habits that we were talking about earlier. One is you got to know what you're doing, okay, and connect to that future. That's exciting. But then you got to win the day. And that's, what am I actually doing today that moves me in that direction, and help you define those successes. And not only that, builds resilience, because now you define success and you go succeed. You define success, you go succeed. And not only that, you're seeing your capacity grow. It just takes practice, though, because most people, they're just getting through the day. They're not saying, what does success look like for this meeting? What does success look like for? It's an added layer of scrutiny on yourself. Now, I always joke and I tell people, your best includes your worst, not just your best. And what a lot of people do is they compare their best to their worst. We tell people, we want you to have the best, worst days you've ever had, because you're still going to have your worst days. It's just, you got to be moving the whole thing up. And that actually is where we learn and grow the most is, wait, I got to do my best when I'm not on. And you see that whole trend line moving, and you do it with your people too. If I have 1,000 people, my job is not to get the best out of the top 10%. My job is to get the best out of 1,000 people. And I need to get and you can get all of them energized if you're using the right focus areas.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot, is like, you've got that, hey, here's the best 10%, right? And we reward them. And then we've got this other, say about 70%, that's like the middle or something. And you're just average is what you're being told. And then you've got the remaining 20%, you're about to get fired. So 90% of your company is average to getting fired, right? Is that
how engaging is that, right? How engaging is that?
And it's like huge companies, this is what they do. It's this kind of structure, and it's not engaging at all. It's kind of life sucking in a way to be continually told you're average. So what kind of practical steps can organizations take to create a more loving, supportive working environment without compromising on high performance?
Yeah, the one thing that we were just talking about, I'll give you a real example. I was working with a sales organization, and they did, here's our top performers. And what I worked with that leader, I said, your job is what if you got the 20% more out of your bottom third of your team? Oh, wow, that make me hit my number. That's the 10% gain I need, or the 7% to hit our number. And then I was like, wait, but are you getting the best out of your bottom third? Are you getting the best out of your middle third? And he realized he was leading one way. And so he realized, wait, I'm showing up, we call left column, really negative with my bottom performers. I was like, that's why they're bad. You're being a bad leader with them. You're not motivating and inspiring them. And what we got them to get is, wait a minute, there's so much productivity on the table with that 90% you were just talking about. And if you just tap into that productivity, you unleash a whole nother level of results. That group we worked with, within 2 quarters, they went from the flat, we're going to, keep pushing people to saying, wait, let's get the most out of the whole team. They were up 33% year over year in 2 quarters and 75% in 4 quarters with the same people. And it is really powerful when you get the most out of everyone. And I go back to my track days, because I like to bring it back to my reality. I was actually learning. I didn't start till late. I didn't start till I was 22. I did other sports, but the decathlon I started late. But so I had to learn things fast, and I was learning how to throw something, and I thought I was doing it right. And I was like, you're doing great. Then I got with a coach that really knew what they were talking about. And he's like, oh, it's terrible. And I'm like, really? It's that bad? He's like, you're using just your upper body. You're only using 20% of your body. So he retrained me how to put my whole body into it, right? Came back 4 months later, I was world class. And I was using 80, 90% of what I had instead of 20%. And the results were just, literally went from mediocre, not relevant, to world class in 4 months. That's what you can do when you tap into the full potential of your workforce.
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy. It's just like, you're just all arms or something right now.
That's right.
And that's just such a small part of your body. How do we get these other parts of your body engaged? So you think about that as the overall corporate, organization. And you're just throwing with your arms. If you're just,
right,
rewarding that top 10%, you're not looking at these other areas. I just want to underline that, just because that's just a huge problem, is for these companies that kind of act that way, and you wonder why your staff isn't as engaged, or your engagement scores are really low, It's because you're just throwing with your arms, essentially.
That's right.
The rest of the body's not engaged here.
No, and we know too. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, to take that analogy a little further, I think we know too that eventually your arms are going to give out, right? There's going to be some kind of injury, and yeah.
And not only that, you're like, it's hard. Okay, when you're doing it the wrong way, it's hard.
Yeah.
Okay, it's heavy and it's hard and it's difficult. When I learned the right way, it was easy because everyone was in sync and in flow. And that's one of the things we learn about high performance. It's counterintuitive. People think to get better, it's got to be harder. The irony is, and this is why what we do sticks, is to get better, it's got to get easier because you got to work smarter instead of harder. We're not asking the 10% to give 20% more because that's where your results come from. We're saying, keep giving us your best, but we're going to go get more. Now, ironically, one of the things we learned is the top 10%, some of them were just more talented and they weren't giving it their all yet. So they actually weren't optimizing the entire group, right? So it was a real learning. And you asked a question, what can we do to help drive this? There's a thing that happens when you do your best, your true best, your best gets better. So what this leader started to recognize was progress, not just results. So if you were getting better and better, that means you were giving it your all. And then because there's a phenomenon that happens when you use your capacity grows. And so what he started to recognize was, okay, here's our top A players. Great. We got to still do that. But here are these other people that improved by 10, 15%. That meant they were growing, they were getting better. Now, everyone wanted to get better and better.
Do you have issues, and how do you overcome them when it comes to resistance on what you're talking about within, leaders? We just gave a good example, an analogy, but I'm sure you face all kinds of resistance. What do you do?
Yeah, that's why we always start with we're going to help you be as high performing as possible. And always we anchor it back to their metrics. We call that what's your air, water, food? What are the things you have to win on? Well, we're going to help you be high performing there, but you got to think and work differently or else you're going to keep getting the same results. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So we do anchor it back into measurables and measurable results, getting that leader to get that, gosh, that bottom third, they're really holding you down. If they're up by this much, what does that do to your overall number? So we do bring that back to that performance, but we get them to get that it takes a minute to change behaviors, to change practices, but we do it against the scoreboard. Like, okay, if you do this right, this will help drive results.
So, Mark, I was hoping we could go back just a couple topics. You hit on a really key word, and I think it was the term sustain. Today we talk a lot about work-life balance, and it's definitely a lot tougher, with the technology that we have, and working a lot from home. So I'm curious, how do high performers manage to sustain the balance between that productivity or not compromising on the productivity?
Mike, it's a great question because we confuse activity with productivity too, and performance. And because this is why it's different now that you're always accessible. You can always be reached by any device. There is no off time. Things are always moving, and the change is happening fast too. But think of that accessibility component. And this is why that commitment to high performance matters, because we don't want to commit to working harder because there is that point of negative returns. Like working harder, you literally get worse and worse and worse. And I did that as an athlete where I was working the hardest and I was getting injured. Because why? I was doing too much. So, and my coach, who was one of the elite sprint coaches in the world that I met with later, is you're not measured on who's working the hardest. You're measured on who's running the fastest. There isn't a test, but you worked really hard. And that's why anchoring in on your performance is key. That's why a big part of as an athlete, your downtime is part of your job. Like you have to get good rest. You have to get, you got to get away from it. You got to do these things that actually make you get stronger and feel better. Because if you just wear yourself down, your performance is going down. And that's why we often see people, they're looking at activity, not productivity and performance.
Right.
And it's like, what's that right balance and listen, we can all grind out a tough week, but we don't live in weeks, we live in years, right? So it's like, you can't sustain that. That's a sprint, right? But if you sprint, but you're in a marathon, you're going to crash. You've got to sustain. You got to say, what works for me? And that's where it's customized. Like, what works for me? What works in this organization? And we talked about culture earlier. We talked about mindset, but there's organizational cultures too. And one person may fit great in one culture, but then they're in a culture that's not good for them. And that's okay. It's just, we were talking about getting the 100% from there is a 5 to 10% that they're in the wrong job in the wrong company. And the best thing for them is to figure that out and go to a place that's good for them. That's career development is, I'm not good at this. I need to go over there. But it same works with culture too. So that is important, Mike, in terms of how you feel. But you got to find what is driving the best results, not I just need to put in more time.
Right. No, and I find too that allowing for recovery and actually coming to the realization that you need that is one of the toughest things. And I think now as I've gotten older, I almost realize it, because I used to be able to run day in and day out.
Yeah.
And time catches up with you. And it's so hard to have that mindset of that you can't go do this again, the very next day at the same level. And so I just find even allowing yourself to have the sense that, hey, I need this recovery is tough sometimes to even come to grips with. But I think your point about capacity shrinkage is a good motivator in thinking, I'm going to get worse if I keep pushing, right? So it's a really good point.
Long-term goal is my capacity keeps growing. Right. And what that means is my 100% is more 3 months from now, 6 months from now, or a year from now. I'm still giving 100%, right? It's just the goal is my 100% is growing. If we're going about it the wrong way, my 100% could be going in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
I always think about, as a leader, the more you take on stuff, the more work you have to do, for yourself. And I think probably the same is true for the organization, right? The more you take on, the more internal work you have to do for yourself. So for thinking about that, what does like the ideal client look like for you? What stage of their business life cycle are they in? Where's your sweet spot?
It's interesting. We are pretty broad with our clients because we deal with the people side, and there's some basic things that most clients don't do well that we can come in and help. So pretty broad in which we work. But there are certain things where we're really helpful, like when innovation transformation, when changes, like we're going through a big transformation. People don't do well with that. And we help give a framework to help people make these turns and organizations make these changes better. That's why we've grown a lot just since COVID, because that change and transformation has accelerated. So we have, 25, 30 new logos just in the last few years. So just from that one. The other is new organizations as they're growing. New or mid-size as they're growing rapidly, because they have to evolve faster from a cultural standpoint. And what got them to that point isn't going to help them. They got to recreate what good looks like. Then the big ones, big organizations are a little stale, like they've been doing things the same way. They use us to kind of break their old cycle of doing things. So those tend to be three very different, but it's for different reasons. Our tool works very well.
Yeah, it's interesting. We talk about here, building love into scalable systems. And we talk about there's that stage of growth where you're scaling, right? And then you got followed that up with typically is a system stage where you start systemizing stuff. And so if you start systemizing the wrong stuff there, things go sideways, on scale, basically.
Yeah.
So that just brings me to this question though, when people say, the business is business and that's it, what do you say to someone who says love doesn't belong in business?
Well, I think I don't agree with that statement for a lot of different reasons. Because first, I love what I do, right? So I go to work. When I love what I do, I'm going to work at a different level if, I got to go to work. So, just getting to a place where you love what you do will elevate your own personal, like how you show up every day and the way in which you're passionate about what you do or not passionate about what you do. By the way, when you love what you do, it's easier to do it. But then there's the interconnection piece. One of the things I've learned through some of the deeper, more like we call Achieve Elite, like one of the things that is most part of being human is feeling of connection. And we need that feeling of connection. And it's something we crave. And when we have it, we perform at a different level. And, I think about my team, the people I work with, and I'm very family oriented. They're an extension of my family. They've been with us for a long time. And, I love my kids. I love my family. I love the people I work with. And we have a bond, and I'm committed to their success. And we do the same with our clients. We are there for them to be successful. How do we make them be successful in what they're doing? And so I think there's a lot of heart in that, and versus, hey, we're just here to hit a number for you.
It sounds like it's a key part of high performance, right? Loving what you do, right? There's no way around. Key part of sustainability,
high performance. Like if you're doing something but you don't like it, it's not going to last, right? You got to get, and that's where it is a massive key ingredient, no question.
Mark, where can people learn more about the Achieve Institute or find you online?
Yeah, so the best our website, it's achieveinst.com. That is the best place to kind of go look at what we do and how we work, and obviously follow us on LinkedIn and things like that as well. But that's the best place to probably go get our information.
Mark, once again, great to have you on. That's it for today's episode. We will see you on the next Bliss Business Podcast.